Story 1. I grew up just a few miles from Yosemite, so you'd think I'd seen every odd shadow the forest could throw my way. I used to listen to true crime and paranormal podcasts. Park Predators was my go-to, and I never imagined that one crisp autumn night would blur the line between legend and reality for me. I had planned a solo camping trip in a secluded backcountry area of Yosemite National Park. I'd been looking forward to it for months, craving a bit of solitude and the chance to reconnect with nature. I set up my modest camp near a quiet stream on the edge of a dense pine stand, determined to enjoy the crisp air and the tranquility the park offered. The night was clear, the moon rising high to cast long, eerie shadows beneath the towering sequoias, and even though I was alone, I felt secure. After all, the park had always been my sanctuary. Then around 2:30 a.m., something snapped me out of sleep. I was tucked inside my tent, huddled against the chill, when I was suddenly jolted awake by a sound, a quiet rustling mixed with an indistinct moan. At first I assumed it was the wind playing tricks, or maybe an animal passing by, but the sound had a pattern, a deliberate quality that made my heart begin to race. I reached for my flashlight and unzipped my tent, stepping out into the cold night. I shivered not only from the temperature, but also from a growing sense of dread. The forest that had been so inviting under moonlight now looked ominous, every shadow seeming to move with a life of its own. I stood still for a moment, straining my ears. Then I heard it clearly, a soft, almost sorrowful humming coming from deeper among the trees. It was too human, too intentional, and yet completely out of place in the natural chorus of the wilderness. Determined to pinpoint the source, I followed the sound along a narrow, winding path. My flashlight's beam danced over gnarled roots and tangled underbrush, lending a mismatched rhythm to my footsteps. I can't say how far I walked, but the sense of being drawn deeper into a part of the park I'd never visited before grew with each step. Then at a small clearing near an overgrown boulder, I saw her. She appeared almost like a mirage, an indistinct figure standing near the edge of the clearing, backlit by the pale moon. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, a ghostly shape that existed only where darkness met the glow of the moon. But as I stepped closer, I realized she wasn't an illusion. She was a small girl, no older than 10, wearing a faded, old-fashioned white nightgown that looked like it belonged decades ago. The gown was stained and torn at the edges, and her hair hung in greasy strands over her face, obscuring her features except for a pair of eyes that glinted with a mixture of sadness and fear. I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling my pulse hammer in my ears. "Hello?" I called out softly, not sure whether I should be comforting her or alarming her further. The girl didn't respond immediately. Instead, she remained motionless, staring off into the darkness as if she were watching something I couldn't see. A cold lump formed in my throat when I realized that her eyes, when they finally met mine, held a deep, unspoken terror. They weren't those of a child at all. They were ancient, sorrowful, almost pleading, as if she carried an unbearable burden. Transfixed, I took another cautious step forward. "Are you lost?" I asked, my voice quiet. For a split second, she tilted her head. Then, without warning, she screamed. The cry was piercing, a bone-chilling sound that shattered the silence and sent a jolt of pure fear up my spine. I stumbled backward, fumbling to lower my flashlight. Her scream echoed off the surrounding trees, mingling with the rustle of the wind and leaving me momentarily speechless. Before I could collect myself or try again, the girl's figure wavered, as if she were made of smoke in the grasp of a gust. And then she was gone. I fumbled for a count of seconds, scanning the clearing desperately. There was no sign of her, no footprints, no broken branches betraying her passage. Only the quiet, accusatory silence of the forest, now heavier and more oppressive than before. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. Had I really seen a lost child, or had my mind, fueled by solitude and the ghost stories I'd grown up with, spun a nightmare into reality? The rational part of me screamed that there must be a logical explanation. The girl could have been a local child playing a prank, or perhaps a victim of a long-forgotten accident in the wilderness. But deep down, I knew what I saw was far too coherent and sorrowful to be merely a trick of the light. I rushed back to my tent, my hands shaking so much that I nearly dropped my phone. I sat there in the dim red glow of my portable lantern, trying to steady my breathing. Hours later, when dawn finally broke over the mountains, I ventured out to retrace my steps, searching for any clue that might indicate the girl's presence. I combed the clearing, looked for footprints in the damp earth, examined the path for misplaced items, but nothing remained of her visit. It was as if she had been nothing more than a phantom, a spirit drawn from the park's many legends. The next day, I reported the incident to a park ranger at the visitor center. I did so in detail, explaining every moment from the sound that woke me to the scream that had echoed through the trees. The ranger listened with a mixture of skepticism and a curious seriousness. He told me that there had been local legends, a story passed down for generations about a little girl who wandered the woods, a spirit said to appear when the park was burdened with sorrow or tragedy. He didn't confirm or deny her existence, merely shrugged and said, "These parts of Yosemite have a way of keeping their secrets." I left his office with more questions than answers, feeling that the mystery of that night was perhaps meant only for me to bear. I returned home, a mix of dread and disbelief churning in my stomach. In the months that followed, I couldn't shake the sensation that the park had changed me. Every time I heard the distant call of a bird or the rustle of wind through the pines, I half expected that mournful cry to rise again, that fleeting glimpse of those ancient, sorrowful eyes to reappear. I haven't seen anything like that since, though the memory remains vivid and chilling, a constant reminder that even in places as beautiful and hallowed as Yosemite, the veil between our world and something else, something unexplainable and timeless, can sometimes momentarily lift. To this day, I still listen to park predators and true crime stories, but none have ever quite matched the eerie, disturbing experience I had on that autumn night. My friends think I'm overreacting, that it was just a trick of the light and a haunted mind playing on a quiet night. Story 2. I always considered myself a seasoned camper, but there are some nights in the wild that change you forever. I remember that trip to Poudre Canyon outside Fort Collins, Colorado. Late in the season when all the official campgrounds were locked up and you had to find your own spot in the backcountry. My buddy Aaron and I had roamed most of Colorado and Utah, so we weren't new to roughing it in nature. But from the moment we pulled off that random, little-known road in the canyon, something felt off. We stopped in a clearing beneath ancient pines and rugged rock outcrops. The area was quiet in a way that grated on your nerves despite its beauty. No other campers, no lights, just a wild open space that made you feel very small. As soon as we unloaded our gear, my eyes caught something on the ground. Lying near a discarded log was a tattered blanket, wrapped around what looked like the skeletal remains of an animal. The creature was long dead. Its bones were exposed in disturbing clarity beneath the faded fabric. At first, I figured it might have been a pet that someone had abandoned or disposed of without a care. But the sight sent a shiver down my spine and immediately set the tone for the rest of the night. "Man, that's grim," Aaron muttered, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting something to jump out from behind the trees. "I hope it's just a stray mess-up. This place gives me the creeps already." We shrugged it off and began setting up our camp a few hundred yards away, figuring the farther from that unsettling find, the better. Once our tent was up and our small campfire crackled to life, we decided to take a hike to clear our heads. We figured that a bit of exercise might help shake off the eerie vibe that had settled over our campsite. With our packs loaded and flashlights in hand, we ventured off into the dense undergrowth. The trail was barely visible in the dim light, the trees forming crooked silhouettes against the starless night sky. We climbed a few gentle hills and soon came upon another oddity. Dangled from the branch of an old pine was what looked like an abandoned tent. Its fabric was torn and faded, and it was awkwardly wedged against the trunk. I half expected to see a body inside or for the tent's contents to be some twisted trophy, but when we approached and peeled it away from the bark, we found nothing but a neat collection of notebooks and a worn sleeping bag. "Aren't you curious?" Aaron asked, rifling through the notebooks. "Who leaves all this behind? It's like someone just packed up their memories and tossed them out." I didn't answer immediately. The sight of those mundane items, written pages filled with the scribbles of an unknown camper, was unsettling in a way I couldn't quite place. It wasn't valuable, but it carried the weight of someone's past, a hidden narrative that had dissolved into nothing. I shuddered away the thought and urged us to explore further. We resumed our hike, eventually descending down a steep, narrow slope that led us along the side of a rugged hill. The trail here was treacherous, with loose gravel and jagged rocks making every step uncertain. As we navigated the descent, an overpowering, sickly odor suddenly assaulted our senses. It was the unmistakable stench of decay, like the smell of a carcass left too long under the sun. We slowed, our boots crunching over scattered leaves and debris, as the revolting odor grew stronger. "There's something nasty up here," I said, my voice low and tense. "I can't even stand it." Aaron squinted into the darkness until we came upon a tree twisted at the base of the hill. Strapped to its bark, about 200 to 300 feet up the steep flank, was a small towel. It was an odd sight, clearly not just discarded by the wind. The towel was positioned as if it had been intentionally draped from the tree, and it appeared to be concealing something beneath it. There was no obvious trace of it being blown there by an errant gust. Instead, it looked like someone had carefully placed it high up, facing the top of the hill, as though it were a marker for something. We huddled at the edge of the trail, debating what to do next. "We should probably leave it," Aaron suggested, his voice a mix of uncertainty and caution. "Not every mystery has to be solved, you know?" But my curiosity, and that familiar stubborn urge that had driven me on countless camping trips, pushed me forward. After a few more minutes of tense silence and several comforting swigs of bourbon from our flask, we decided to make our way back up the hill. Our movements were hesitant, almost ritualistic, as if we were summoning some courage from the ghostly shadows that danced around us. Climbing back up was even harder in the dim pre-dawn light. My legs trembled from the steep ascent, and the smell of death still clung to the air, making me gag occasionally. When we finally reached the base of the tree where the towel was attached, we exchanged nervous glances, our shared apprehension palpable in the cold air. I picked up a long, sturdy stick from the ground, our makeshift tool for disturbing mysterious objects, and approached the towel. "All right, let's see what's inside," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. With a steadying breath, I pulled the towel away from the tree. Underneath, in the dim light of my flashlight, lay the crumpled, lifeless form of a recently deceased owl. Its feathers were ruffled and matted together by what looked like fresh blood, and its eyes, glassy and unseeing, stared blankly into the darkness. The bird's body was almost disturbingly intact compared to the decay we'd witnessed elsewhere, and its presence, wrapped in a simple towel in such an inaccessible spot, struck me as more than just a random occurrence. I stood there in a horrified silence for a moment, my mind reeling. Who or what would kill an owl like this, wrap its body in a bright towel, ease it up a steep hillside, and set it against a tree as if it were some kind of cryptic warning? Aaron's voice broke through my thoughts. "Dude, that's fucked up," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't random. It's like someone did this on purpose." We didn't linger. The mixture of revulsion and disbelief spurred us straight off the hill and back to our camp. Once there, we huddled around a small fire, the flames flickering in the dark as we downed the rest of our bourbon. The raw chill of the night mingled with the surreal images of our discoveries to create an atmosphere that was impossible to shake. Every so often I'd catch Aaron's eyes, and I'd see reflected there the same haunted look that I felt creeping up my spine. By morning, the sun crept over the horizon and dispelled the immediate darkness, but it did nothing to clear the lingering dread that had settled over us. We packed up our gear quickly and left that accursed spot, hardly daring to look back. Back in Fort Collins, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. I explained it as the work of a disturbed prankster or someone with a twisted sense of art. Aaron shrugged it off as one of those bizarre mountainside rituals that you hear about in local legends. But deep down, I knew what we'd witnessed was something else entirely. An act, or series of acts, that were meant to unsettle and warn, hidden in plain sight among the rugged beauty of the Poudre Canyon. I've camped in plenty of places since then, traversed countless trails through national forests and parks, and yet nothing's ever matched the eerie combination of decay, deliberate mischief, and the inexplicable placement of that owl's body in a towel. I still hear whispers about that spot from other campers, stories passed around over campfires. Some say it's cursed, that it was the work of a local with a penchant for the macabre. Others chalk it up to overactive imaginations fueled by isolation and the raw, unpredictable spirit of the wilderness. For me, the strangest part was not the skeletal remains we found at our initial camp or the abandoned tent in the tree, but that final, deliberate disposal of the owl. It felt like a message, a silent, gruesome declaration that there are secrets in these woods that you're not meant to stumble upon. I still wonder who would go to such lengths to send that message and what it was trying to say. Every time I drive through the Poudre Canyon afterwards, I can't help but glance at any unusual debris or discarded items along the roadside, half expecting them to signal something terrible waiting just out of sight. In the end, we got the fuck out of there by morning, our senses numbed by shock and disbelief. We didn't tell anyone much about it. Some stories are best kept as nightmares shared only between friends on cold nights. But trust me when I say, if you ever find yourself deep in the backcountry of the Poudre Canyon, keep your eyes open. You never know when you might stumble across another twisted message in the wilderness, waiting silently to remind you that some secrets are best left undisturbed. Story 3. I've been a trucker for decades, and Australia has thrown all sorts of weird at me over the years. But there's one night I'll never forget. I was heading up a lonely mountain road in South Queensland, hauling through the dark at around 11 p.m. The stars were bright enough to feel like a blanket overhead, but that was about the only comfort. The rest of the night felt heavy, almost too quiet. After hours behind the wheel and one too many cups of instant coffee, nature called. I pulled off to the side of the road where the asphalt barely gave way to a patch of grass. The air felt colder than it should have been, sharp against my skin as I stepped out of the cab. The silence hit me then. No buzzing insects, no birds, no sound at all except for the occasional car passing in the distance. It was eerie in a way that made me hesitate, but I shook it off and walked far enough away from the truck to get some privacy. I had barely started when I heard it, a deep thump echoing from the trees ahead. I froze for a second, listening. Kangaroo? Maybe. But kangaroos don't usually hang around long enough to be heard like that. Same goes for wallabies. I figured it was nothing and carried on. But then the sound came again. Closer this time. A deliberate thump, like something big shifting its weight in the forest. My stomach tightened, but curiosity pushed through before caution could stop me. I grabbed my flashlight from my belt and pointed it toward the tree line. The beam revealed nothing but trunks and tangled branches, no movement, no glowing eyes reflecting back. I flicked the flashlight off quickly, not wanting to draw attention to myself. The third thump was louder, more resonant, like it wanted me to know I wasn't alone. My gut screamed at me to get back to the truck, but instead of listening, I took a step toward the edge of the forest. I don't know what I was thinking, I'd later tell my nephew, shaking my head as I tried to rationalize it. But at the time, I thought I could figure out what it was. Prove to myself it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. As I inched closer, the air grew colder, almost biting against my skin. That's when the thumping stopped, replaced by a faint, rhythmic sound. Breathing. Not the soft, fluttery kind you'd associate with a small animal. This was deep, labored, like something big taking steady breaths from just beyond my line of sight. Then I saw it, a shadow shifting between two trees, low to the ground but massive in its width. It moved too fast for me to get a clear look, darting from one tree to another in a flash. My pulse shot up, and I stumbled back, swinging my flashlight wildly. The beam caught nothing but empty air and the shadows of tangled branches. Every instinct told me to bolt, and I wasn't about to argue. I turned and practically sprinted back to my truck, my boots crunching on the gravel as I struggled not to trip. As soon as I climbed into the cab and slammed the door shut, the low hum of the engine felt like a lifeline, a shield against whatever was out there. My breathing was rapid, but I managed to convince myself I was safe. That's when I saw it in the rearview mirror. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from the stars or the angle of the headlights. But as my eyes adjusted, it became clear. There was a shadow standing behind my truck, just beyond the taillights. It was tall, broader than any kangaroo or emu, with limbs that seemed unnaturally long. It wasn't moving, just standing there, watching. I didn't stick around to find out more. I slammed the ignition and peeled out, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the road. My heart was pounding as I kept glancing in the mirrors, convinced the shadow was following me. It wasn't until I reached the glow of a roadside diner in the next town that I let myself breathe again. Even there, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the chatter of a few late-night patrons, I couldn't shake the feeling of something watching me. I didn't sleep much that night, every creak of my truck outside the motel window making me sit bolt upright, my pulse hammering. I never drove that stretch of road again, not after what happened. I told myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the coffee had gotten to me, or maybe the isolation of the mountains had played tricks on my senses. But deep down, I knew it wasn't normal. Kangaroos don't move like that. Wallabies don't breathe like that. And whatever was standing behind my truck wasn't anything I'd ever seen before. I know one thing for sure, I'll never stop on that road at night again. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Story 4. I woke to the overwhelming pressure in my bladder, the kind that refused to let me get back to sleep no matter how hard I tried. It was the middle of the night, deep in the Amazon rainforest in Brazil, and everything was pitch black except for the faint silver glow of moonlight filtering through the treetops. The jungle sounds, chirps, rustles, an occasional distant screech, felt louder somehow, more alive, more intrusive. I wasn't about to wake anyone else in the camp, so I slipped out of my sleeping bag, grabbed my flashlight, and made my way past the tents. I didn't want to pee right next to our camp. That would be gross, and honestly, I didn't want anyone stumbling into me half naked while I squatted. So I moved farther away, just enough to avoid any awkward scenarios, but not so far that I couldn't make a mad dash back if something weird happened. The flashlight carved weak, flickering shadows across the underbrush, but I quickly decided not to use it. Even that bit of light felt oddly exposing, like the jungle was watching me. The moonlight was dim, but it would have to be enough. Finding what felt like a discreet enough spot, I squatted low, hovering just above the damp earth. I was already feeling a bit nervous, the sheer density of the Amazon pressing in on all sides, suffocating in its vastness. The trees were so thick, their trunks swallowing what little light the moon gave, and the shadows seemed to shift even without the wind. I wasn't scared, not yet, but there was an undeniable unease in my chest as the sounds of the forest seemed to close in around me. That's when I heard it, a soft crack of a branch, faint but distinct, like a footstep pressed deliberately against the underbrush. It wasn't the quick scurry of a small animal darting through the ferns or the flutter of a bird settling into its nest. It was deliberate, heavy, like something big. My breath hitched, and I froze midstream, every muscle in my body tensing as I strained to listen. It came again, a shuffle, followed by the unmistakable sound of something moving closer. My heart began pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, loud and erratic, as though it was trying to drown out everything else. The presence felt enormous, towering, something strong enough to snap the thick vegetation underfoot with ease. My instincts screamed, "Predator." I didn't dare move or turn my head. My ears were locked onto the sound, trying desperately to figure out what I was dealing with. A jaguar? A tapir? Something else? Whatever it was, I could tell it wasn't in a hurry. It didn't care about keeping quiet. It was stalking, slow and deliberate, as though it knew exactly where I was. I didn't have much time to think, just finish peeing and get out of there. But even as I tried to wrap things up as fast as I could, the noises became louder, closer. The sound of something brushing against the dense foliage sent chills down my spine. I felt exposed, vulnerable, like prey caught in the sights of a hunter. Every nerve in my body told me I needed to run, but I couldn't yet. I had to finish first, and doing so was the single most agonizing moment of my life. Finally, I was done. I yanked my pants up and bolted, adrenaline exploding through me like a panic-fueled lightning bolt. I didn't bother looking behind me, didn't dare glance back to see what was there. All I could think was, move now. My legs pumping as I tore back toward the camp. The sound followed me, growing fainter as I ran, but it never completely disappeared. Each step I took, I could still hear the occasional crunch of leaves, the faint echo of something heavy shifting through the jungle as it trailed behind me. I burst into the clearing where our tents were, panting and shaking so hard I could barely zip myself back inside mine. I crawled into my sleeping bag, clutching the fabric like it was a shield, and lay there trembling for what felt like hours. I couldn't fall asleep. How could I, knowing that something was out there, something big, watching, following? Every rustle of leaves outside made my breath hitch. Every distant chirp sent my heart racing. By morning, when the sky finally shifted to a muted gray, I crawled out of the tent and forced myself to act like everything was fine. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. What would I have said? I went to pee, and I think something almost ate me. They'd laugh it off, say it was just my imagination. Or worse, they'd take me seriously and ruin the rest of the trip with paranoia. But even now, I can't shake the memory of that night. The weight of the jungle pressing down on me. The deliberate steps of something far bigger than me. And the sheer terror of knowing I was utterly alone in the dark with it. I don't know what it was, whether it was an animal or something else entirely. All I know is that it felt more alive than the forest itself, a presence that lingered long after the sun rose. I haven't gone camping in the Amazon since. Maybe someday I'll go back, but not at night, and definitely not for anything that involves wandering away from the group. There are parts of the wild you just don't want to face alone. That night taught me that in the worst possible way. Story 5. The day had been normal enough. I was hiking alone in a national forest, a sprawling stretch of wilderness I'd explored countless times before. The sky was blue, the sun filtering softly through the treetops, and my boots crunched rhythmically over the trails. The forest smelled of damp earth and pine, and I remember feeling completely at ease, the way nature can make you forget the world beyond it. But nature has its darker side, and that's the part I ended up discovering. I'd wandered off the main trail just to explore a bit. The forest was quiet, peaceful, with no sign of another soul for miles. The further I went, the more isolated it felt, the kind of silence that presses down on you. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and the soft snap of twigs underfoot. It was calm, but in hindsight, too calm, a kind of manufactured stillness, like the forest itself was holding its breath. That's when I saw it. It wasn't marked by anything obvious. No signpost, no indication it should have been there. Just a large rectangular pit tucked between two trees in a clearing. At first, I didn't process what I was looking at. The edges were rough, the dirt freshly dug, loose clumps scattered around it like someone had been working there very recently. It was about the size of a grave, maybe longer, and deep enough to suggest more digging had been done than just an idle hole in the ground. I stood frozen, staring. My mind tried to rationalize it, maybe a drainage project or an area marked for research. But there were no tools, no barriers, nothing to suggest it was official. It just sat there, stark against the greenery of the forest, like it didn't belong. And the longer I stood, the more unsettling it became. Every rational explanation I attempted got overridden by something primal, something in my gut screaming to get away. What if someone was buried here already? What if I was looking at something I wasn't supposed to see? Worse, what if whoever dug it was still nearby? I scanned the area, my heart thumping faster now. My breathing got shallow as paranoia set in. The clearing was quiet. No movement in the trees, no sign of anyone. But that didn't mean much. Whoever had dug this hole was deliberate. They didn't just leave it there by accident. My imagination started running wild, picturing shadowy figures creeping through the trees, watching me watch their work. I didn't dare move closer to the pit. The thought of falling into a different pit, a trap with some awful intention, kept me rooted where I stood. My mind kept conjuring images of other holes hidden nearby, maybe with something already lying at the bottom, something I'd stumble into without realizing it. I don't know how long I stood there, but I started to feel like the forest had changed. The shadows stretched wider somehow, darker than they should have been, the quiet heavy and suffocating now. I wasn't alone, even if I couldn't see anyone. A deep instinct kicked in. Get out! Move! Now I backed away slowly, careful not to make any noise, every muscle in my body tight. I took each step deliberately, listening for anything that might betray movement around me. Even the sound of my boots seemed loud, too loud for the oppressive silence pressing down on me. The trees felt closer than before, hemming me in as I edged toward where I thought I'd come from. My pulse thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. It wasn't until I'd put some distance between myself and the pit that I let myself pick up speed. I wasn't running, not yet, but the urgency in my movements couldn't be hidden. My eyes darted from side to side, scanning every shadow, every ripple in the underbrush, as though the forest itself had come alive with malice. I kept expecting to hear footsteps behind me, the crunch of dirt or twigs under boots, maybe even an echo of my own movements. But there was nothing. Just that oppressive silence that seemed to follow me. When I finally hit the main trail again, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in what felt like hours. I didn't stop moving, didn't let myself look back until I was within sight of my car. Only then did I dare turn around, my pulse still racing. The forest looked normal again, just the peaceful stretch of green I'd always known. But that pit, that dark patch tucked into the clearing, so out of place, it lingered in my mind like a bruise. I didn't tell anyone what I'd seen when I got home. What could I even say? That I'd stumbled onto a potential grave in the middle of nowhere? That I felt like the shadows themselves had been watching me? I rationalized it as best I could. Maybe it had been a site for a forest project or an abandoned attempt at digging for something mundane. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right about it. Nothing about the way it sat there in the clearing, alone and unmarked, seemed normal. Even now, the memory of that pit sends a shiver down my spine. I don't hike alone anymore. I don't wander off the marked trails, and I definitely don't try to explore areas that seem too quiet, too untouched. Whatever I saw in that clearing, whether it was a grave, a trap, or just something left behind, I'll never forget the feeling it left me with. It wasn't just the pit itself that scared me. It was the idea of what might have been lurking nearby, waiting silently, just out of sight. I'll never go back to that forest. Some things you see once, and that's more than enough. Story 6. It was one of those summers that I'll always remember, working as a college undergrad with a grad student out in Jornada del Muerto. The name itself, Journey of the Dead Man, should have been enough of a hint that the place had a strange energy. The desert there stretches endlessly, a vast expanse of cracked earth and dirt roads that thread their way through nothingness. It was hot, dry, and alive in its own subtle way. Prairie dogs darting between burrows and distant silhouettes of bison grazing like ghosts on the horizon. We were out there for field work, which meant long, quiet days under a brutal sun. The kind of days where time seems to melt and minutes drag on, blending into each other. I like the quiet, though. It was peaceful in a way that felt rare. The kind of peaceful that made you forget the world outside the desert even existed. Until that one day. The sky had been relatively clear all morning, just a few wisps of cloud rolling lazily over the horizon. But by early afternoon, it started to darken. At first, I didn't think much of it. Storms roll in fast in the desert, and they're usually gone just as quickly. But when the rain came, it wasn't a light drizzle. It was a torrential downpour, sudden and ferocious, hammering down on the dirt like it was trying to drown the earth itself. We scrambled back to the truck, trying to pack up our gear before it got completely soaked. The rain turned the dirt roads into slippery sludge in minutes. The grad student, Darren, was at the wheel, his face tense as he navigated the narrow, winding path back to camp. Visibility was next to nothing. The rain fell so hard it looked like sheets of glass cascading down the windshield, even with the wipers on full speed. The desert, usually so open and expansive, felt like a claustrophobic trap. I remember staring out the side window, watching the flashes of lightning cut across the horizon. That's when I saw it. A yucca bush. Just a random bush on the side of the road. Except, it was on fire. I blinked, thinking maybe the lightning had struck nearby and sparked a flame. But no, this wasn't a flicker, something about to be snuffed out by the rain. This was a fire, Bright orange flames engulfed the entire bush, licking up into the sky as if they were feeding off something deeper than just the dry twigs. The weirdest part? The rain didn't touch it. The storm was hammering down harder than anything I'd seen in months, but the flames burned on, defiant, unwavering. The contrast was so stark, the fire roaring, consuming, while the rain lashed against the ground all around it, like nature itself was trying to put it out, but failing miserably. Darren? I managed to croak, my voice tight. What? His eyes stayed glued to the road, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Do you see that? I pointed to the bush, but I didn't need to. Darren glanced sideways as we passed it, and his face went pale. For a moment, we both just sat there in silence, the only sound the relentless drumming of the rain on the truck's roof. What the hell? He muttered, his voice trailing off. Neither of us had an answer. It was uncanny, surreal, like something out of a fever dream. We didn't stop, didn't pull over to investigate. We just kept going, driving through the storm as fast as the muddy roads allowed. The image of that burning bush stayed seared into my mind, though. The way the flames seemed alive, defiant, and the thought that someone, or something, might have been responsible for it sent a chill down my spine that no amount of desert heat could erase. It wasn't until we got back to camp that we started talking about it, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. Darren suggested lightning. It was the most logical explanation, but even then, it didn't sit right. Lightning doesn't do that, he said after a while, his voice quieter than usual. It doesn't burn like that, not in a downpour. I didn't have any better answers. The symbolism of it wasn't lost on me either. I mean, a burning bush? Out in the middle of nowhere? It felt biblical, almost too perfect in its eeriness. Like the desert was trying to send us some kind of message, though I couldn't for the life of me figure out what it was. That night, as the storm passed and the desert settled back into its usual stillness, I lay awake in my tent, listening to the sound of the wind rustling through the brush. My mind kept circling back to that image, the glowing flames, the way they danced and flickered without being consumed. It wasn't just bizarre, it was wrong. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain. In the weeks that followed, I tried to put it out of my head. We had other work to focus on, and the desert didn't leave much room for distraction. But every now and then, I'd catch Darren staring off into the distance, his brow furrowed like he was still trying to piece it together. We never talked about it again, though. Not really. Maybe because neither of us wanted to admit how much it had unsettled us. Years later, I still think about that day, about the burning bush and the way it felt like we'd stumbled onto something we weren't meant to see. I've heard stories about strange things happening in the desert, lights in the sky, unexplainable sounds, figures glimpsed at the edge of vision. But this was different. This was real, tangible, and yet it defied everything I thought I knew about the world. I don't know what we saw out there in the Jornada del Muerto. Maybe it was just lightning. Maybe it was a freak accident, something explainable that my brain couldn't quite process at the time. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something more. Something the desert wanted us to see, if only for a moment before it disappeared into the vast, endless expanse. The desert keeps its secrets well, but some of them, it seems, are too strange to forget. Story 7. I didn't hear the sound at first, not clearly anyway. I was walking alone through a particularly quiet section of trail in Sequoia National Park, surrounded by those ancient giants towering endlessly above me. The forest was alive with its usual hum, the rustle of leaves far overhead, the occasional chirp of a bird perched impossibly high, and the low creak of branches swaying in the breeze. I'd spent hours exploring these trails before, and I'd always found them calming. But that day, something felt heavier. There was a strange stillness in the air, though I didn't notice it right away. The trail wasn't crowded with hikers. I hadn't seen another person for miles. The ground beneath my boots was soft, covered in layers of fallen needles and loamy soil. I paused occasionally to take in the scenery, those towering trunks, impossibly thick and weathered, each one seemingly ancient beyond comprehension. I was alone, lost in the mesmerizing scale of it all. Then came the sound. Faint at first, like a distant growl rolling through the forest. I stopped mid-step, scanning the towering red trunks ahead, trying to pinpoint the source. It could have been thunder, I thought, or maybe wind picking up speed farther down the valley. But the air was still, no hint of movement in the canopy above. No cold gusts sweeping through the trails. Whatever it was, it didn't feel like it belonged. The growl deepened, grew louder. It wasn't thunder, not the sharp crack of lightning or the rumble of a storm brewing in the distance. This was different. Lower. Deeper. It sounded like the earth itself was waking up beneath my feet. My gut told me to keep moving, to step forward quickly and get away from the sound. But curiosity kept me rooted in place, and then the ground started to tremble. It wasn't dramatic at first, just a subtle vibration traveling up through the soles of my boots. But it built rapidly, escalating into a full-on shaking that sent loose pine needles tumbling to the ground. I stumbled backward instinctively, my heart racing. My first thought? Earthquake. But even that didn't feel right. The shaking was rhythmic, like waves crashing in slow motion, building to something I couldn't quite comprehend. The sound shifted, growing sharper. A loud crack split the air, echoing through the forest with a force that felt like it could have torn the sky in half. My ears rang from the intensity of it, and I turned sharply toward the source. That's when I saw it, just ahead and slightly to the right of the trail, one of the ancient giants swaying unnaturally in the sunlight. It wasn't swaying like branches caught in the breeze. It was leaning, tipping, shifting its massive weight forward. I stood frozen, watching as the Sequoia, hundreds of feet tall and impossibly thick, began its descent. Another crack tore through the air, the trunk splitting away from the base like some primal wound ripping open. The sound wasn't just deafening, it was visceral. It reverberated through the ground, through my body, through the very air I was breathing. I stumbled backward again, half terrified that the tree was falling in my direction. The trail was close, too close, and my mind raced with images of being buried alive beneath the sheer weight of it. But even as I moved, I couldn't take my eyes off the tree. It was mesmerizing in a way. The way it tilted forward, slow but inevitable, the branches flailing like desperate arms, all leading to the moment when the trunk finally collapsed into the earth. When it hit, the sound was more than just loud. It was catastrophic. It was thunder, but not the kind from the sky. The kind that comes from the earth itself. The kind that demands attention, that feels like it could swallow you whole. The ground heaved beneath my feet, throwing me off balance as the shockwave rippled outward. Dust exploded upward from the impact site, a cloud of dirt and bark fragments swirling into the air like smoke from an ancient pyre. The branches, once impossibly high in the canopy, now lay scattered like broken limbs, their massive size incomprehensible up close. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I stood there staring at the wreckage, heart pounding and ears ringing. The sheer scale of what I'd just witnessed, the force, the sound, the trembling earth. It left me stunned. My brain scrambled to process it, to find words that could explain what I'd just seen. But the reality of it was beyond language, beyond logic. It wasn't until the dust began to settle that I realized how close the tree had fallen. Just a few feet farther, and the trail itself would have been obliterated, along with me. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about the raw power of that collapse and how lucky I was to be standing just far enough away. I wanted to run, to put distance between myself and the wreckage, but my legs felt like they were stuck in molasses. Eventually, I forced myself to move, stepping cautiously away from the fallen giant. I glanced over my shoulder repeatedly, half expecting another tree to come crashing down. My imagination started playing tricks on me. Every rustle of leaves, every distant creak of branches sounded like the prelude to another collapse. The forest, once peaceful and serene, now felt alive in a way that was unsettling. The weight of those ancient trunks, the sheer scale of the space, all pressed down on me like I wasn't supposed to be there. When I finally made it back to the trailhead and saw the parking lot in the distance, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The adrenaline slowly faded, leaving me with a trembling unease I couldn't shake. I didn't tell anyone about what I'd seen right away, not because I didn't think they'd believe me, but because I couldn't find the words to describe it. How do you explain the sound of the earth splitting open beneath one of the oldest living things on the planet? How do you describe the ground shaking under something that stood for centuries, only to fall in a matter of seconds? I haven't hiked that trail since. Not because I'm scared, but because it feels different now. Like the forest showed me something I wasn't meant to see. Something that I'm still trying to wrap my head around. That day reminded me that nature isn't just beautiful or serene. It's powerful, unpredictable, and sometimes deeply, eerily unsettling. And it's not something I'll ever forget. Story 8. I was maybe 10, maybe 11, and it was the last night of our Cub Scout camping trip. We'd spent the evening huddled around the campfire, trading ghost stories that got darker and more absurd as the night wore on. The kind of stories that get under your skin, not because they make sense, but because your imagination fills in the blanks afterward, when the firelight dies and you're left lying in the dark, thinking about every shadow in the woods. My friend Danny and I weren't ready to sleep. The other kids had zipped themselves into their sleeping bags, and the scout leaders were busy chatting near the main cabin. The campgrounds were quieting down, but Danny had that glint in his eye, the kind that meant trouble was brewing. "Let's go," he whispered, nudging my arm. "Let's just walk around a bit." It didn't take much to convince me. Armed with nothing but a single flashlight, the dim, flickering kind you get at the dollar store, we crept out of the tent and onto one of the paved paths winding through the trees. It was one of those clear nights when the stars were so bright they almost hurt your eyes, but the forest beneath them was pitch black, the tall pines blotting out most of the moonlight. The air was damp and cool, and every little noise, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, felt amplified. We stuck close together, taking slow, deliberate steps. The path ahead curved slightly, dipping down into a hollow where the trees loomed even closer. Danny was ahead of me, sweeping the flashlight from side to side, and I was trying to play it cool, even though my stomach was doing flips. "Come on, this is boring," I whispered. "Let's head back." "Scared already?" Danny shot back, grinning over his shoulder. Before I could answer, we both froze. It was faint at first, barely audible over the rustling of the trees, a clicking sound, rhythmic and deliberate, like footsteps. Not human footsteps, though. These were lighter, sharper, like something with hooves. It was coming from behind us, slow and steady, following the curve of the path we'd just walked down. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. Danny nodded, his grin long gone. We both stood there for a moment, straining our ears. The clicking grew louder, closer, and the hair on the back of my neck stood straight up. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. "Shine the light," I hissed. Danny raised the flashlight and aimed it behind us, the beam trembling slightly in his hand. At first, we didn't see anything, just the empty path, stretching back toward the campsite. But then, just beyond the reach of the light, something moved. Two glowing eyes reflected back at us from the darkness. They weren't like animal eyes. They didn't dart around or blink. They just stared, unblinking, unwavering, locked onto us like a predator sizing up its prey. Then the flashlight caught something else, the glint of antlers. Large, twisted antlers that seemed to branch out endlessly, their silhouette etched against the black of the forest. For a split second, I thought, it's just a deer. It has to be a deer. But the shape wasn't right. It was too tall, too broad, and it wasn't moving like an animal should. It just stood there watching us, the clicking sound slowing, then stopping altogether. That's when Danny screamed. He didn't say a word, didn't look back, just turned on his heels and bolted down the path, the flashlight bouncing wildly as he ran. I wanted to run too. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to move, but I couldn't take my eyes off the thing in the darkness. It hadn't moved, not yet, but I could feel it. That weight, that pressure, like it was daring me to take one step closer. Slowly, I began to back away, my legs trembling so badly I thought they might give out. The eyes didn't move. The antlers didn't shift. But there was this feeling, this overwhelming sense that if I turned my back, it would be on me before I could take 2 steps. So I kept backing up, one shaky step at a time, until I was far enough away that I couldn't see the glow of its eyes anymore. Then I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the campsite, my chest heaving, my hands slick with sweat. Danny was already there, sitting on the ground near the fire pit, clutching the flashlight like it was his lifeline. He looked up when he saw me, his face pale and streaked with dirt. "You saw it too, right?" he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, collapsing onto the ground beside him. Neither of us said anything else for a long time, just sat there listening to the quiet hum of the campsite, waiting for something, anything, to break the silence. The next morning, we didn't tell anyone what had happened. We figured they'd laugh, call us out for making up stories to scare the younger scouts. But as we packed up our tents and loaded up the cars, I kept glancing back toward the woods, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring out at me from the shadows. Story 9. It started as just another hunting morning, quiet, cold, and full of anticipation. My dad and I were up early, heading out to my cousin's land in western Wisconsin for opening day of deer season. It's a yearly ritual. The hills there are perfect for hunting, and the land's always full of deer. Over the years, my cousin, his dad, my dad, and their friends all pitched in to build a proper hunting shack and tree stands scattered across the property. The tradition runs deep, and the rules are simple. Stick to the schedule so everyone's in a different area, stay safe, and hopefully bag a deer. That morning, my dad and I planned to set up on a hillside before sunrise. We hopped on the ATV, marked our location on the schedule in the hunting shack, and headed up. The air was crisp, our breaths visible as we wound through the trails. The forest was quiet, eerily quiet in hindsight. We got set up, hunkering down in our spot with the perfect view of the hill and the trails below. The sun crept up, spreading a pale orange glow over the horizon. We waited and waited. By 9 a.m., we hadn't seen so much as a squirrel. Not a single sound of movement in the woods, no rustling, no bird calls, just silence. My dad eventually muttered something about warming up and grabbing coffee, and I wasn't about to argue. We packed up our gear and started back toward the ATV. The trail down was steep in places, winding through dense trees that blocked out most of the light. My dad led, and I followed close behind. We stopped every so often to listen, just in case a deer was nearby. But the only noises were the crunch of our boots and the faint creak of branches swaying overhead. That is, until I heard something else. It was faint at first, just another crunch, like footsteps trailing us. I froze, focusing hard on the sound. My dad and I always walk in sync during hunts. It's a habit we've perfected over years of trying to make as little noise as possible. But this wasn't us. It came from behind, a fraction of a second after we stepped, mimicking our rhythm almost perfectly. Almost. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to my dad. He stopped and turning back to look at me. "Hear what?" he asked quietly, his brow furrowed. But by then, the sound had stopped. I glanced over my shoulder, scanning the forest behind us. Nothing but trees and shadows. I shook it off, telling myself it was probably just a trick of the woods. We started walking again, and for a few minutes, everything was fine. Then I heard it again. Closer this time. It was the same sound, that mimicking crunch, like footsteps trying too hard to match ours. My stomach tightened as I turned back, flashlight in hand. The sun wasn't high enough to fully light the trail yet, so most of the forest was cloaked in shade. I scanned the trees, my heart pounding. At first, nothing, just the same skeletal outlines of branches and a curtain of shadows. Then I saw it. Something moved, a pale flash, like someone ducking behind a tree about 30 yards uphill. I couldn't make out details, just a face, a pale, round face that poked out for a split second before disappearing again. My mouth went dry, and I stood frozen, staring at the spot where it had been. "Dad," I hissed, reaching out and grabbing his arm. He stopped, following my gaze. We both stared up at the hill, waiting. The forest around us had gone deathly quiet. No wind, no creaks, no birds. Just silence, thick and unnerving. Then it appeared again. The face peeked out from behind the tree, staying longer this time. I could see its features now. White, almost unnaturally pale, with dark, sunken eyes. It wasn't human, or at least, not entirely. It looked twisted, wrong. Its shoulder jutted out from behind the tree next, dark and small and oddly angular. The rest of it followed slowly, a gnarled, misshapen body that barely resembled anything natural. "Get to the four-wheeler," my dad whispered, his voice low and urgent. I didn't hesitate. I started backing down the trail, keeping my eyes locked on the thing. As it stepped closer, its movements jerky and deliberate. My dad started the ATV, the engine breaking the silence with a roar. I didn't look away as I climbed onto the seat behind him. The thing didn't run. It didn't lunge. It just stood there watching us. Its dark shoulders twisted unnaturally as it tilted its head, almost like it was curious. My dad hit the throttle, and we tore off down the trail. The rush of air and the growl of the ATV were deafening, but I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, convinced it was following us. But when we reached the hunting shack and I finally looked back, the trail was empty. The forest was still again, like nothing had happened. We didn't stick around. Nobody else was there yet, but we didn't wait for them. We threw our gear in the truck and drove off, the tires kicking up gravel as we left. Neither of us said much on the ride home. I think we were both too shaken to put it into words. I haven't gone back to those woods since. Story 10. It wasn't my idea to camp in the middle of Mark Twain National Forest that summer. I was 10 years old and my parents had decided a real adventure would be good for us as a family. No campgrounds, no other people, just us, the woods, and what little gear we remembered to pack. It seemed like one of those ideas that only made sense to adults. We arrived just as the sun was sinking behind the hills. The forest was bathed in a dull orange glow, long shadows stretching across the dirt path as we hurried to set up camp. There was no time to appreciate the view. My mom and my sister scrambled to pitch the tent while I stayed out of the way. Meanwhile, my stepdad, already reeking of the beer he'd been nursing on the drive, started yelling because we'd forgotten the lantern. "Great planning," he snapped, his voice booming through the trees. None of us dared argue back. He was meaner when he drank, which meant he was almost always mean. By the time the tent was up, darkness had fully settled over the forest. We didn't have a fire, my stepdad couldn't be bothered to make one, and none of us wanted to stick around to ask. So we climbed into the tent early, the four of us crammed inside like sardines, and lay there in the inky blackness. The only light came from the faint moonlight filtering through the fabric of the tent, pale and useless. I tried to sleep, but every little sound outside seemed louder in the stillness. The rustling leaves, the occasional snap of a branch, all of it felt unnervingly close. My mom and sister lay silently beside me, their breaths shallow. My stepdad snored loudly near the entrance, oblivious to the tension. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. At first it was faint, just the soft crunch of dead leaves somewhere in the distance. I thought maybe it was an animal, a deer or a raccoon passing through. But the steps didn't stop. They got louder, steadier, unmistakably human. Someone or something was walking through the woods, heading straight for our campsite. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound wasn't hurried, but it wasn't hesitant either. It was deliberate, like whoever was out there knew exactly where they were going. Beside me, I felt my mom stiffen. My sister squeezed my hand, her small fingers trembling. The footsteps came closer, shuffling through the underbrush. No flashlight, no lantern, just the sound of someone moving in the dark. My mind raced, conjuring every terrifying possibility. A lost hiker, a hunter, or something worse. We lay there in silence, too afraid to move. My stepdad, miraculously, had stopped snoring. Though whether he was awake or still asleep, I couldn't tell. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were just a few yards from the tent. I could hear the crunch of twigs, the rustle of leaves, the faint whisper of fabric brushing against branches. Whoever it was, they were right outside. And then, a snap. The sound of a twig breaking underfoot shattered the stillness like a gunshot. It was close, too close. My stepdad reacted first. He let out a blood-curdling scream, a sound I'd never heard from him before, raw and terrified. My mom followed with a shriek of her own. "Let's get out of here!" she yelled, her voice cracking with panic. We didn't think, didn't hesitate. We bolted. My mom grabbed my sister's arm, and I scrambled after them as my stepdad unzipped the tent flap in a frenzy. We tumbled out into the cold night air, our breasts visible in the dim light. The forest loomed around us, dark and impenetrable, but we didn't stop to look. We ran blindly toward the car, our footsteps loud and frantic on the dirt. I didn't dare look back. I couldn't bring myself to see who or what might be following us. My only thought was to keep running, to reach the safety of the car before whatever was out there caught up to us. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but adrenaline pushed me forward. When we finally reached the Honda Civic, my stepdad fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking so badly he dropped them twice. My mom yanked the door open, shoving my sister inside before climbing in herself. I followed, squeezing into the back seat as my stepdad started the engine. The headlights flicked on, cutting through the darkness, but the path ahead was empty. No figures, no movement, just the same still quiet forest. He slammed on the gas, the tires kicking up dirt as we sped down the trail. None of us spoke. The tension in the car was suffocating, the kind of fear that doesn't leave room for words. My mom clutched my sister tightly, her knuckles white. My stepdad kept his eyes on the road, his jaw clenched, his face pale and sweaty. I sat there in the back seat, my heart still racing, trying to process what had just happened. We didn't go back for our stuff. The tent, the sleeping bags, the gear we'd brought with us, it all stayed there, abandoned in the forest. My stepdad never mentioned it again, and none of us were brave enough to bring it up. But that night left a mark. I stopped camping after that. Even the idea of sleeping in the woods makes my stomach twist with anxiety. To this day, I don't know who or what was out there. Maybe it was just someone wandering the forest at night, someone who didn't mean any harm but chose the wrong moment to pass by. Or maybe it was something else, something that doesn't belong in the light of day. Mark Twain National Forest is still there, of course, but for me, it's a place that exists only in memory, a memory that comes with a shiver and a reminder to stay far, far away from the woods at night. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.